What's up, my furry friends? It is Dev from The Place, and today it is time for the big one, the Bloomburrow Top 50, all written out pretty like right here in this notebook. Probably the 20th time I've written the stinking list out. I gotta say, quick note before we really get into things here. I've been doing these best cards in a set lists on YouTube for almost a decade, 9 years now. Thank you very much, by the way. But in all that time, I can't really recall having more difficulty putting a list together than this one. There's 50 slots and honorable mentions because I can't help myself, but still, there's 20 cards I would have wanted on this list somewhere that I didn't find room for. Flame Cash Lizard isn't on this list. How does that happen? The card looks unbelievable. Why does it even exist? So there's a lot of really good stuff in this set, no lie, and I've got a lot to say about it. So I think I've honestly already wasted enough of your time. Let's get to the Bloomburrow Top 50, you filthy animals. And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech. And we're back. Make sure you like, subscribe, check out the Patreon if you want to support the channel, all that stuff. I'll hit you up again about it at the end of the video, but I think I'm supposed to tell you in the first couple of minutes about my socials. It's YouTube theory. Don't mind me. But anyway, let's move on to the honorable mentions. Let's get to the whole reason you clicked on the video in the first place. I have got one of these. Surprisingly. Look, I know you always expect 6 honorable mentions from me. I've only got one this time. But it's 4 different cards. I'm not going to fool you for long. You know exactly who I am and who you're dealing with at this point. It's just removal this time. And I've been doing this with honorable mentions in the last couple of sets because I would often much rather devote slots on the list to actual interesting, cool Magic cards and not just a thing that's point and click, get rid of that thing. And this time's no different. Cards like Parting Gust might be among the best cards in the entire set. This is 2 mana to exile a thing, which is pretty good. And it doesn't even have to remove a creature, right? This can also blink one of your dudes. So, cool card right here, obviously, and probably going to see a fair amount of play, but so is Feed the Cycle. Both of those statements, cool card, going to see a lot of play. Just a fairly good black removal spell that will probably show up at some point. But there's also Consumed by Greed, which is kind of a Soul Shatter variant that I really like. And there's even Paw Patch Formation, if you want to count that. It does remove flying creatures, and it removes enchantments. But also it can draw you a card at instant speed while making a food token, and I think that's a pretty good deal for a couple of mana, especially with the other modes. So, again, really, really good removal in this set, but removal is also kind of boring, and like I said, I want interesting cards to be on the actual list, so let's see what we picked for that. Now, number 50, as usual, is an extension of the honorable mentions, What's a card that I think a lot of people are going to like? I'm not sure if it's actually that great, but it probably is going to at least go in a bunch of Commander decks. Well, I think there's one card in the set that fits all of those criteria perfectly, and it's Patchwork Banner. I just really like what this card is doing in this set, in general. In Limited, which I almost never talk about for these videos, but it really helps tie the room together, Lebowski. It's great in that format. But when it comes to Commander, specifically casual Commander, I think that this thing is going to see a lot of play, man. There really aren't a whole lot of anthems that you can drop and not skip your turn. A lot of 3-drop anthem effects. It's cool, glorious anthem. I like swole dudes, but I kind of didn't really get to do anything else on my turn. But when you drop this, you get to tap it to drop a 1-drop of the relevant type. So that seems really, really good. So, I don't know. Again, casual Commander is probably where this thrives the most, but that is the most played paper format in the world by a pretty huge margin. So have fun, I guess. But we'll move on to number 49. Another couple of Commander cards await us ahead on the list because the high 40s are usually reserved for cards that I think are going to be really fun, unique. That's important. Build-arounds in Commander. But not necessarily, I don't know if they have the steam for 60 card 1v1. So with that in mind, let's look at Igra, Eater of All at 49. Yeah, all the way up here. But again, I'll state my case again. I just don't know if it's going to be the best guy in Standard. Now, in Standard, you do have the Anzrag's Rampage combo. Just drop Igra and then drop Rampage the turn after that. Or maybe you have 10 mana, but you probably do it one turn after the other. You blow up all your opponent's artifacts. Igra gets huge because all those foods went to the graveyard. You swing in free and clear, you win the game. Seems fun, but really more of a content creator combo. I don't think you're going to see that at the Pro Tour anytime soon. But again, we get back to casual Commander. Suddenly this becomes a really, really neat build around that you really can't get this effect anywhere else. So again, seems really cool. I like the flavor on it too. And I love huge Golgari creatures as a matter of course, but I'm not sure this has the legs for Standard, but it's going to eat good in Commander for a long time. Number 48 is another Commander I think will be fun to build around. It's Aluge, the Shoreless Sea. Normally, I'd see a card like this and be like, sure, but this time the name is correct, I guess. I am sure less on this one, at least again, in terms of Standard. I don't know if this really has the tentacles. I was going to use legs again. I'm not really sure this has the squid apparatus to like really climb to the top of standard, but when it comes to commander, bud, yeah, I think you're doing a lot better, man. Like, even if your opponent does kill it, that's cool. The flood counter it created when it came into play sticks around, so you play it again out of your command zone. Bing bong. Now 2-drop spells cost 2 mana less. Then that just gets worse as the game goes on. Plus, there's a couple of cards already extant in Magic the Gathering that can put flood counters on things, and this will count them. So, I don't know. Again, I think in Commander, this really, really fun to mess around with, and you don't have a whole lot of effects like this. So, well, it's pretty cool there. It's probably going to be one of the most hyped new Commander build-arounds in the entire set, and that definitely means a lot. Now, numbers 47 and 46 are where Standard starts to kind of like peek its head out of the bushes. Like, hey, what's going on here? Are we playing some Magic? So let's look at 47 next. It's Balin, the Haymaker. Are you actually making hay, or is it like a punch? I think maybe it's a double. Is that not really a double entendre? But you know what I'm trying to say. Balin looks like a good Magic card, man. This might actually force us to add green to Boros. I don't think we go that far in Standard, though. But this is the first time that I've seen one of these legends in the set and been like, okay, maybe. When it comes to Standard, you know, if we do add green to Boros, then suddenly this does everything that deck wants to do except add green. It doesn't want to do that. But again, when we look at Commander, in tokens decks, this is either a ridiculous Commander or just a really solid piece of the 99. So with the ability to see maybe some play in Standard, but also definitely be a Commander all-star, like, yeah, Balin's on here. I mean, the card does like 12 different things. What is that, actually 3 different things? That was close, but anyway, I like drawing cards. This card makes it easy, so I think it should be on here somewhere, but since I do like drawing cards so much, I am a little scared, slightly nervous, that number 46 is way too far up this list. It is Dowerport Mage, which I have mostly clocked as a Commander card, but the more I think about it, the more I could be super wrong, and this is actually an all-star in like 60-card 1v1s from Standard all the way back to Modern. Now, the reason I've got this clocked mostly for Commander is the Temur Sabertooth ability, and I know it's not exactly the Temur Sabertooth ability, but Temur Sabertooth, say it one more time, Dev, is it's one of the few creatures with this ability to ever exist and still sees play in Commander, so this cost half of what Sabertooth does and still has the ability to save your dudes, bounce them, replay them, whatever, and that tends to be a very good ability in Commander, but honestly, it's the first line of text here that makes me most nervous that I'm wrong about this card's actual playability, because that is a busted line of text. There's so many ways that your dudes can leave the battlefield without dying, much less its own activated ability, which you get to draw a card off of, which is very cool. But yeah, there's tons of ways to have your creatures exiled, or maybe bounced, or maybe flickered, or whatever to get them off of the table. And then suddenly you might draw a ton of cards. This isn't restricted to once per turn either, which is a real surprise in this day and age. This card could legit draw you an Ancestral Recall's worth of cards in a turn. So again, maybe I'm super wrong and this should like be in the top 10 and I'm just being a big old stupid. It has to find a home and all the usual excuses that I use. But again, when it comes to casual Commander or even CEDH, I really do believe this card has a very bright future ahead of it. And perfectly named card, at least in terms of the initials here, because its DPM is probably going to be pretty high at the end of the day. But number 45 is Somehow Valley Quest Caller. The more I look at it since I've sat down here on the couch, the more I'm like, this card's ahead of Dowerport Mage, which is probably a comment I'm going to make a couple of times in this video. But yeah, Valley Quest Caller is definitely going to see a lot of play in Commander if you use all these creature types or even some number of them. But this, more than any card we've talked about so far at least, I think has a pretty good shot of seeing Standard play, if these different like kindred decks for these creature types, or even one with all of them, is important. And I think the chances that like rabbits or mice are important creature type decks is actually relatively high. For number 44, let's stay down in the Valley. Look at Valley Flamecaller real quick. This is another one that I think just is really good in Commander. With any number of these creature types and also changelings, which I should have said, I guess, about Valley Quest Caller. It's like anything that where creature type matters in this whole set, just remember that changelings are a thing too. And Quest Caller is amazing with those, but also remember, we're probably going to get changelings as part of the Lorwyn return sometime in 2025, and that's going to be a Standard set. So this card's still legal. Changelings in Standard seems really, really good. But again, even if you're in Standard and you've restricted yourself to some number of these creature types, this is going to do a buttload of extra damage and is also effectively like a 3-mana 4/3. Note, too, that it's not just when that creatures do damage to players or whatever. It's when they do damage to anything. So if you get blocked up, your opponent better have done that math right, because it'd be really easy to forget that this card does that. So, I don't know, man. I think that anything that ruins combat math effectively is an Anthem effect, that has a decent power toughness for the rate, works with so many different creature types. Yeah, man. That's a good Magic card. Not embarrassed. Now, we've reached number 43, and the more I look at it, the more I'm like, I should have switched you in Dowerport Mage. The card's going to be a meme by the end of this video. But yeah, it's Moira. Moira? I don't know. On the previous stream, they called it Moira, and I'm like, that's not how you spell Moira. But still, Moira Trash Tactician over here. This is a Gruul creature that does not die to cut down, does not die to bolt, and is probably always going to give you at least some amount of ramp, right? Like, it gives you one ramp no matter what, and is probably overall the best payoff for raccoons in the set. And there's not really a whole lot of payoff for raccoons, to be honest. So, not really a whole lot of competition either, but this is very good payoff for raccoons, especially if your 2-drop raccoon was the one that ramps anyway. Right? The 2-drop that gives you a red mana when it attacks or whatever that thing does. Even if it's your only raccoon, just getting that one ramp is sometimes going to be more than enough. And haven't even talked about the expend, you know, you cast a big dude, you gain 3 life. That seems all right. Keeps you in the game against aggro and all that stuff. And expending 8 and getting, you know, effective card advantage is pretty sweet too. I know it's hard to expend 8, but I believe in you. You can do it, you know. So I think this card is actually really sweet. But again, just switch it with Dowerport Mage. If you're still watching the video, just switch it with Dowerport Mage in terms of positions on the list. I do think it's good. My number 42 is Gev's Scaled Scorch, because Leaping Lizard, you see all the stuff this card does? Jeez Louise, macaroni and cheese. 2 mana for a 3/2 is already a decent stat line. And apart from that, the ward is a real cost. The fact that it hits whenever a lizard comes into play, like, that's a real thing. It's got the Vampire Socialite text on it too. Like, good lord, man. Like, how much better did you need to make that card for it to be playable? I guess that card, Vampire Socialite, works with a creature type people actually like and play, and there's a ton of in Magic, so much so that if you're going to build vampires in Commander or something, like, you actually have to make real cuts. But with a card like Gev, if you're building in Commander, it's your Commander, you just play all the lizards, you know? So it's a little bit different, but I think not only is this a really sweet Commander, but it's also an amazing Standard card, dude. I don't know if it goes too much farther beyond Standard, but in Standard, even in a not Lizards deck, it's just kind of a solid 2-drop. You know, it doesn't say creatures you control, or it doesn't say lizards you control enter the battlefield with the counters. Just creatures. Just creatures. So like a Rakdos aggro deck. This is kind of good enough, even if it never procs off of another lizard. But I guess if it's the only lizard in your deck, you can play a bunch of copies of it. Because, like, just cast the other Gev, they legend rule, but you still get the 1 damage, you know? That's something. So, I don't know. There's a lot about this card I like. Mostly 2 mana, 3/2 ward, pay 2 life. I think that's just kind of good enough already. But number 41, we are about to leave the Legends corner. Don't worry. It's Zoraline Cosmos Collar, though. Kind of to bring us home here. Zoraline is a really good-looking Magic card to me, man, but I can't justify it being too high up the list. I do think it could be a cool commander, but mostly I think this is just a standard card. If it's even that, but maybe the fact that it's an Orzhov bat that gains life and also reanimates, it just literally does all the things that I want for a Magic card to do, you know? So, again, I might be a little bit biased here, but when I see a 3 mana, 3/3 flyer with another keyword ability outside of that, and Vigilance is a pretty effective one in this format, where, you know, this can swing into a Deep Cavern Bat and still block the Deep Cavern Bat next turn. I think that matters, but it also works really well on curve with Deep Cavern Bat. You'll be gaining a lot of life on this attacks trigger, but aside from that, it can also get back your Deep Cavern Bat. Is this card just supposed to work with Deep Cavern Bat? Is that what's happening? But it can also get back your Deep Cavern Bat for the same effective mana cost, mana value at least, as your Deep Cavern Bat cost to cast in the first place. Its life gain that it's giving you will hopefully offset the life loss that it's causing you. You get the trigger multiple times, so this can either be a 3 mana creature or a 5 mana creature, but if it's a 3 mana creature, you can activate it next turn when it attacks too. There's just so much sort of modality in the ability on this card, but apart from just how cool that ability is and how it keeps you in the game and gets stuff back from your yard and all that stuff, it's also, again, just a fine creature. 3 mana, 3/3, 2 keyword abilities that also gains a life whenever it attacks, if nothing else. So, yeah, man, I think this is probably a standard playable card, but it's going to be cutting it close. But if there is one thing that's going to help it see play in standard, it's how much it works with number 40, which is Lunar Convocation. I don't know that you play Convocation on 2 and then Zoraline on 3. I think you actually do it in the opposite order. Zoraline on 3, Convocation on 4. Tech aside, yeah, these cards obviously work really well with each other, but Convocation is just the much better card, I think, all things considered. It's not Bitter Blossom. It is It is Batter Blossom. I guess I'll use that joke again. I also like the way it works with Sheldra the Apocalypse, because if you have Sheldra on the table and you draw a card, it's neutral in terms of life. So it's just pay 2, draw a card. And that's also sick. But you also did lose the life. But you also did gain the life. So you're guaranteed the bad at the end of the turn. So again, when you work that well with one of the best cards in Standard, I think you might have a chance at seeing play. But beyond Standard, I think this has a shot, again, in Casual Commander. Because of all the things that it does. It's kind of a dawn of hope for Commander purposes that is also a Bitter Blossom for Commander purposes. And when you make those 2 cards kiss, I think they create a pretty sweet offspring, pun intended, in terms of the mechanics of this set. Let's move on to number 39 here, which is another legend. I'm so sorry about that. There's actually another one after this. This one is Vren the Relentless. I actually saw a bunch of people put in work with this during the early access event, and it did shoot it up the list just a little bit. This may have been in the mid 40s before now, but I know you can't judge too much off of early access events because everyone's playing goofy stuff, but this seemed to be nearly in every single situation I saw people play it in, it seemed to be a decent Magic card. It's got that Kumano Faces Kakazan text that we all hate so much. This does cost 4 times as much to get into play as Kumano, so you got to deal with that. But in terms of the damage that a mid-range creature can wreak on the game, in terms of the ways that a mid-range creature is supposed to take over the game, from what I've seen so far, and just from what I can tell without even seeing the card being played, Vren is capable of those things. If your opponent's not careful, they can lose a couple of guys, and then suddenly you have a massive amount of board presence over them. And do you understand how swingy it is to take 2 creatures off their side of the table and put 2 creatures on yours? This is a very good Magic card. You'll see. At number 38 is one that I have really gone back and forth on. Do I even want this card on the list? Yes, I do. It's Helga Skittish Seer. I think that this is a really, really good looking Bant mid-range piece. Not sure what else it does. I don't even think it goes in the Frogs deck that you might think it wants to go in. I think that deck is just like Simic and doesn't have the white mana. But whatever. What do I know right now? I'm just some dude. I do think, though, that a Bant mid-range could use this as a pretty incredible 3-drop centerpiece. See what happens. Yeah, it dies to cut down, but not after you played literally 1 4-drop. It no longer dies to cut down or bolt. So it's got that working for it. Ends up creating a lot of mana. If you can Anthem it or, just cast a couple of large spells with it, it'll make a ton of mana. Cast things with X in their cost, which is pretty sweet when Hugs is in this set and a bunch of other X cost creatures in Standard at large. But I don't know, man. The more I look at it, the more I think, it's up the beanstalk. This is just up the beanstalk with extra steps, rather than having to cast a 5-drop thing and rather than drawing you a card when it comes into play. It smooths things over by making you cast 4-drop creatures instead of 5-drop anything. And that's slightly easier, although I guess you could also say it's slightly harder. I do wish you could cast any old spell with this and draw the cards, but again, in your mid-range deck that's creature-based anyway, and you're going to be playing a 4 or 5-drop creature anyway, you might as well make this your 3, and then suddenly gaining life, drawing cards, making this bigger, and getting your 5-drop ahead of schedule. Yeah, I think that was a good enough reason to play Helga in your deck, so card's definitely on this list somewhere. I talked myself into it. Number 37 is another one of those cards that I kind of want to be like, you'll see. You'll all see about. And it's Spellgyre. This almost ended up on the sleepers list, but I feel like too many people know it's going to be decent for me to put it on the sleepers list. I tell you, for the last couple of months, we've all known that Memory Deluge was about to rotate. We'd be like, how do we replace Memory Deluge? Is it, Farsight Ritual, or is it Intrude on the Mind, or is it Silver Scrutiny, or all these blue card draw spells that we kind of want to re-resort to or have never resorted to before because Deluge was so good? I actually think there's a chance Spellgyre does it. I actually think there's a real God's honest truth chance that Spellgyre is the new Memory Deluge. I know it doesn't look at a bunch of cards, but it is Surveil 2, Draw 2, which is amazing considering it's so much better than Scry too. But if you don't need your card draw spell, or if your opponent just casts a spell that says they win the game or something, this is also a counter spell. Incredible modality on this. I mean, they print one of these 4-drop draw 2 with upsides in just about every set. In this case, the upside is Surveil 2 and also another mode that just does one of the best things you can do in a game of Magic. I know you don't want to spend 4 mana on counterspells, but you will when you have to not lose. And in the meantime, the card draw effect on this is kind of nasty, honestly, more than workable. So, yeah, I think this card has a very, very real chance to see standard play. More than real. I'm almost certain this card will show up at some point. But you know what else will? Regal Bunnycorn with more steps. Number 36 is Burrow Guard Mentor. This actually more closely reminds me of like a Shauna, except this time they learned their lesson and gave Shauna Trample. Shauna was not great. I was going to say back in the day, but just like a couple of years ago, I wanted Shauna to be amazing, and she just wasn't. Trample probably would have done that. If a 6'6", 7'7", 10'10" Shauna could actually get through, again, probably would have made all the difference, and this definitely can. So, again, I think that they just made a much better card. Oh, it's not legendary either, which is kind of a problem with Shauna as well. So I honestly couldn't be happier that it exists in the first place. I was happy when they printed Shauna, and then massively disappointed. So hopefully this will make up for that mistake. Number 35 is Ember Heart Challenger somehow. You know, we're getting to the point where a lot of these cards are going to be like, wait, that's number 35? But no, I promise there are 34 cards I think are better than this in this set somehow, you know? Like, I know a lot of people scrub through to the top 25 or even the top 10 when they watch these videos, and you're doing yourself a real disservice every time you do that, but especially this time around, because a lot of the cards in the set are, like, insanely playable, and this is definitely one of them. A 2-mana 2/2 haste is baseline anyway, plus you slap the prowess on it. That's that's in line with Fugitive Codebreaker. That's a playable Magic card, but also when it Valiants, you only get to do it once per turn. But when it Valiants, you draw a card the red way? Are you nuts? Like, why this card just exists and it's not even a big deal somehow? I don't get it. Like, when you target this with like any 1-mana pump spell, just take your pick. There's a pretty good chance that you then get the opportunity to target it with another pump spell and it prowesses again, or target, this with a pump spell and then target the Slick Shot with the pump spell that draws you in the same turn. The card is absolutely phenomenal, dude, and it's probably not going to be able to do that much the turn it comes into play in terms of, prowessing and getting cards for you, but that's only if you play it on curve. The moment you play this on turn 3, there's actually a pretty good chance you can prowess it or, draw the card and actually get to play it or something. So, I don't know, man. There's just so much to this card. It's not Monastery Swiftspear or anything, but, like, it's about as close as you can possibly get in some ways, and the same is true of another card in this set. I'll say that again in this video. So you print so many mice that look like this. Not only is the mono red aggro deck looking good, but the mice deck is looking good, man. I didn't think there was anything that would get me to take mice seriously, but we are definitely having a discussion now. Just call me an elephant. Because they're scared of mice? Is that a thing people remember? It used to be in cartoons all the time that elephants were scared of mice. I don't know what happened to that trope, but what is number 34? We're in a parade of 2-drop creatures here. Why not? It's Stormcatch Mentor, man. Otter Electromancer, whatever you want to call it. I know that it's only a 1/1, but 2-mana haste prowess. Another 2-mana haste prowess guy. In this case, I like cost reduction a little bit better than maybe drawing a card you might not even be able to use once per turn. Now I'm bagging on it. Now I'm finding excuses to bag on Challenger. That card is really, really good, but when you stack it up next to a Goblin Electromancer with haste and prowess, Again, I'm laughing to myself because, like, what, how is this number 34? There's 33 cards in the set that might be better than this card. Yeah, I actually think there are. So, geez Louise, dude. Like, there's a few cards in the set that I just look at them and like, A, how has this not been printed yet? And B, conversely, how did this ever get printed in the first place? And like, this is definitely one of them. You really ought to be careful with cards like this in this set. What is it? Pearl of something like that? It's the Otter card draw spell. If you control this guy, that card costs 1 mana. You know how good that is in the Otters deck? But even outside of the context of the admittedly a little dumb Otters deck, this can do so much in so many things. It doesn't even have to be in, like, is it Spellslinger? This could easily be in a sort of mid-range deck that does play instants and sorceries and stuff. I just really like this card, dude. And I think that, if anything else, just having some redundancy with Electromancer and the other cards like it in Commander, definitely something you want to point out too. But number 33 is Mistbreath Elder, mostly because I'm terrified of it. I think this card might actually be terrible. It might be just bad, just awful Magic card. And, you can't have any other creatures out ever because you have to bounce them. And that's going to get so annoying. And, like, Maybe the card is just absolute trash, but I am extremely scared of cards like this because they represent like the cheapest possible way to set up something broken that you can imagine. And that's what this card is actually doing. I've heard people call it an aggro one drop. No, that's going to be a whole separate entry later in the list. This is not an aggro one drop. This is a tricksy combo-y one drop along the lines of like Nurturing Pixie and other cards like that. And again, that scares me to death. I have literally played Commander games with people who played Stampeding Wildebeests, and I was like, oh, I remember that card from when I was a kid. I love that card. And then it proceeds to do absolutely degenerate stuff for the next 4 turns. Returning the best creature they could possibly return to their hand and get the ETB trigger again. This is a Stampeding Wildebeest that effectively cost 1/4 of the cost of a Stampeding Wildebeest. So like, trust me, this will do absolutely gut-wrenching stuff to you. You will not be the same person after this card is finished. My number 32 is Dark Star Augur, or Bat Bob, if you're old enough to understand that reference. You're old. You're just as old as I am. We're old, friend. But either way, this is not Dark Confidant. I don't want to make it sound like it is, but at the same time, I don't know how much worse it is than Dark Confidant. 50% because of the mana cost. It does cost 50% more, but you can't double up on a Bob. So when you see a flying Bob that can be 2 Bobs if you have the mana, I don't care if it dies to cut down in Standard. You better put some respect on its name. But even outside of Standard, especially outside of Standard, this is probably cool in Commander where you have twice as much life to work around. So offspringing it doesn't seem like it's going to murder you. And I kind of like that about it too. So I think that this card probably has some playability in multiple formats. And as much as people like Dark Confidant and Commander, I imagine they're going to love this in that format too. My number 31 is Dewdrop Cure, man. This was originally on the sleepers list, and then I heard literally every Magic player in the world talk about it. Even the people who don't even know Bloomburrow is a thing. They're just like, have you heard of this card, Dewdrop Cure? It looks good. So, the chance of this being a sleeper flew way out forever ago, but you know, I'll just repeat the same things everyone else has been saying about it. You can get a Croxa back with it. Did you know you can get a Croxa back with it? It seems like something you probably want to do in your Magic deck, but this is also pretty good in the Amalia combo deck in like Pioneer, I think it is, because it can get back both Amalia and Wild Growth Walker at the same time, and then you just combo off. You just go infinite or whatever it is. So that seems good. In Standard, it gets back Elisel Core and Bartolome, plus any number of other, 2-drop creatures you might have built your deck around, no matter what colors your deck is. So, I don't know, man. This is one of the few cards like this. Like, say, Call of the Death Dweller. Call of the Death Dweller was a played Magic card that actually saw a lot of play. Doesn't actually generate mana value, whereas this does. This generates at least 1 mana value, if not doubling up in terms of mana value. And I think that's a huge deal, too. So, yeah, I really like this card, and I really don't think that's a surprise. I'm pretty sure everyone does. Number 30 is a card not everybody likes. It's Long River's Pull. I kind of freaked out a little bit about this during the previous season, and I had people in my comments, as I expected, being like, dude, this card sucks. What are you talking about? This card is amazing. I countered the spell that was going to win you the game, or whatever, and you get to draw a card. Probably a land. Like, it could be a good card, don't get me wrong, but if that thing is going to kill me, I will gladly give you a card to counter that spell. I will gladly give you a card to cast Counterspell. I've had people say this is actually the exact opposite of a man because it gives your opponent the card. But I will also say that it actually counters the thing. It actually counters the spell. And that is really, really good for just 2 mana for a hard counter baby. So just that mode is good. And I haven't even talked about the Essence Scatter mode, or the Essence Capture mode, I guess is what it's closer to. Yeah, if they're playing Atraxa or Sheldred or Preacher of the Schism or some other ridiculous creature, it just is that card, and that's a pretty good card. So I just don't see any world where this card is unplayable. Like, even if you're up against control and they're never going to cast a creature against you, counters Sunfalls, counters Planeswalkers, counters their big, like, win condition or whatever. So, like, well, yeah, play this card, man. I'm telling you, it might technically put your opponent up a card when you think about it, but so that's my counter argument. I know it's not like the most mature or logical argument in the world, but you countered the thing that's going to kill you. They drew a land. I know it's not always going to be a land. I get that. But also, you will play this card. I don't know if you personally will, but people will. This card's going to show up. But we have made it into the 20s, everybody. Congratulations. Number 29 is a card I'm going to have to justify, which I know I do with every single card on the list. It's kind of like the point of the list, but I feel a little guilty about putting Season of the Burrow all the way up here because I don't think anybody really feels the same way I do. I think a lot of people are kind of discounting the seasons as a cycle in general, and I think that's a massive mistake, dude. This card is not Casualties of War. But, trails off. You need to understand that this can blow away 2 non-land permanents. And like it's the same thing as Long River's Pull, which is kind of why they're close on the list here. But they get to draw cards for that action. Technically, meaning you're kind of down or at least even on cards in the interaction. But yeah, you blew up a Sheldred and a really nasty enchantment. So again, you can have a couple of cards. Casualties of War cost a mana more. I really am going to keep up that comparison. Casualties of War cost a mana more than this. And yeah, it can technically blow up more stuff, and it's more playable in Commander because it usually finds a target for all of its modes. But I still think effectively taking out 2 anything you want on the whole board, that's not a land at least, is a very powerful way to use 5 mana. And by the way, you still get a 1/1 too. If you do use this to blow up 2 things, you still get a 1/1. You can just get 5 1/1s, and I actually think that's a better mode than it looks like too. I just feel like this card is woefully underrated, and I didn't even put it on my sleepers list because I think it's just good enough for this list. There's another card like this later too, by the way. Teasers are fun, but let's move on to Ral, Crackling Wit here at number 28. I just think this passive is busted. That's about it, man. I think that if you're doing it correctly, that -3 is a -2 or a -1 or even a -0, like draw 3, discard 2 is a busted mode because you're seeing a ton of cards, and pitching 2 can definitely be turned into an upside in various ways, at this point. I don't think that the storm mode on this, the -10, is like broken or what's going to make the card see standard play or anything. I just think it's going to be the ability to maintain a relatively high loyalty planeswalker that puts bodies on the table and draws you cards when you need them, and all you have to do is just cast spells. All you have to do is cast spells. It's very, very easy, dude. So like Jeskai Control or something like that, I think Ral slots directly into. I'm not sure how good he's going to be outside of Standard or in Commander or anything like that, but in my favorite format, I think he's actually got some work to do. If not now, then at some point in his life cycle. Number 27 is all the way up here at number 27. You'll know what I mean when I tell you that number 27 is Coiling Rebirth. How did it get all the way up here? The more I think about this, the more I think it might actually be the best reanimation spell of all time. It's obviously not better than literally reanimate. It's probably not better than Dread Return. Like there are obviously better reanimation spells than this. I don't want to get too hyperbolic. 5 mana is a lot. Okay. And I think some people would even argue like Zombify is a better reanimation spell than this because it costs less. But the ability to 2-for-1, the ability to get do I even have to explain this? The ability to get 2 Trumpeting Carnosaurs. There's a good creature that it's awesome with. I wish Titan of Industry was still in Standard, man. I really do. But the ability to get 2 dudes off of it is phenomenal because 9 times out of 10, yeah, one of the reasons you're reanimating that guy is because he's kind of big, but that's not the only reason you're reanimating that creature. Not at all. Again, just a Carnosaur. You get a Trumpeting Carnosaur off of this, and you get to discover 5 twice, and you get a 7/6, and for what it's worth, you get a 1/1. Like, I will take that. And this is good with way more stuff than just Carnosaur and Standard. Getting 2 things with ridiculous ETB triggers is literally twice as good as getting 1 thing. So yeah, I think this is like better than the Cruelty of Gix in terms of standard reanimation spells. And that's actually a pretty high bar to clear. Number 26 might actually shock you guys, but I think this card is this good. I really do. Number 26 is Eddie Merc Crab, or Eddie Mercury, or perhaps Eddie Murky. Depends on which celebrity you want this thing's name to sound like. But I do daddy day care about this card a bit much. It could be a crazy little thing called love. This card is fantastic. A crabby little thing called love. I like Queen, but still, this is 2 mana. When's the last time you cast a Tolarian Terror that costs more than a single blue mana? Yeah, this card is 2 mana to cast for a 5/5 flash. And that would really kind of be all it actually had to do. 2 mana, 5/5 flash. I'd kind of play the card right then and there, but no, this is also unbelievable tempo. Whether you're flashing it in, you don't even have to flash it in, but like you can play it on your turn, tap down two of their guys, you can get in for some combat damage, or more likely, even though the text does say it comes into play tapped if you play it during your opponent's turn. Even though it says that, I think you're a million times more likely to play this on your opponent's turn when they move to combat. Tap down two of their guys. I got a 5/5 crab. I untap. Two of your guys are still tapped. And I have a 5/5 crab. Just again, in standard, this seems phenomenal to me, dude. I'm not sure that it actually like makes the cut in the mono blue decks, but I will be a little bit shocked if it doesn't. Either way, the card has legs, and it knows how to use them. ZZ Top. That's not Queen. Let's move on. Halfway through the list, everybody. We've made it to number 25. Are you ready? Place your bets. What do you think 25 is going to be? I want to know in the comments section. I'm going to ask you about number 1 too, but like, number 25 is actually much harder to get than number 1, I think. So, number 25 is Essence Channeler. They knew what Johnny's Pride made, the new Voice of the Blessed. I was so worried that Voice of the Blessed was going to leave, and Amalia just basically isn't a deck anymore, and it's like super sad because all of its friends went to a different school, and it's still stuck at this crappy school. Standard. All of its friends graduated on to Pioneer. And it's still here for another couple of years, man. How could you forsake me like that? But no. Sometimes friend moves away, new friend moves in, and that's exactly what's going on. Has all the same interests. You're going to watch anime together and eat pizza. And I can picture Amalia and this thing doing that. Essence Channeler looks insane to me, dude. It's not quite Voice of the Blessed. It's better in some ways, worse in some others. But honestly, even if you just call that a wash, brilliant magic card. I probably would have put Voice of the Blessed around number 25 here too. I don't think that it's really good in anything that's not trying to gain life, but in those decks, it's basically a card you absolutely have to play. And in Commander, it's like the 10th of Johnny's Pride mate you can play in your life gain deck, so I think you want that too. And number 24 is a card that I sure have seen a lot of people freaking out about. I don't like it as much as they all do, but I still acknowledge that Starfall Invocation is a very good magic card, dude. 5-mana sweepers in Commander are a thing. People play them. You're mostly looking for 4-mana sweepers if you can find them, but 5-mana sweepers exist, and especially one that can just throw a creature right back onto the table. Yeah, it's pretty good. I think it will be played in Standard too, but as far as Standard goes, I'm not sure too many cards are worth ditching Sunfall for. If you're looking at this or Sunfall, you probably just play the Sunfall. But if you've got a really important 3 or 4 drop creature that you're playing with, it's like your whole game plan. You've got Beza, Bounding Spirit. We'll talk about that card at some point soon. But yeah, won't we? I had to make sure that was on the list. I was like, wait, we haven't talked about it yet? No, it's coming though. Don't worry. But yeah, if you like Beza on 4 and then, Starfall Invocation on the next turn and you get Beza, that ETB trigger again on the next turn. I don't know. That all seems good to me. Starfall Invocation might be worth playing in Standard with exactly the right setups. But again, when we get back to Commander, just casual Commander, this is one of the better 5-drop sweepers that I think has ever been printed. And yes, it is definitely worth gifting the card for. I feel like I have to say that. But anyway, number 23 is another big surprise. And this time it's a season again. I told you there's going to be another season coming up on the list. And you're probably like, wait, how is there... Really? Yeah, I think Season of Loss is easily one of the best cards in the set. If it's not one of the best, it's one of the most exciting to me personally. All right, let's break it down. For one, you can just choose 5 paws and everybody sacks 5 creatures, which is mostly on a lot of boards, at least in Standard, that's a sweeper. But even in Commander, that's a sweeper a lot of the time. Also takes out Hexproof and Indestructible guys. That's cool. You can take advantage of lopsided board states. I have 4 guys, you have 3 guys, everybody sack 3 guys. It's a one-sided raft, kind of. And in that way, it's like a Starfall Invocation. You get to keep a guy out. And you don't even have to gift them a card. It's pretty sweet. But the second mode goes pretty well with the first mode, obviously. And the third mode is just kill everybody sitting at the table except for you, which I think is really good in Commander. It says each opponent takes this much damage or loses life or whatever it is. But even in Standard, I think that's a playable way to put opponents out of the game. There are 2 decks I want to play this in. One being Aristocrats. Because, Aristocrats, you want to sack dudes anyway. Sometimes you want specifically that line, that one word, sacrifice. There are cards that benefit you sacrificing creatures. And this will allow you to do that. You need to draw cards in an Aristocrats deck. And honestly, the current Aristocrats, the Ellis Core deck, and if there's one deck in Standard I have real experience with, it is freaking Ellis Core. That deck needs to draw cards outside of just like popping clues to draw cards. That costs too much mana. This deck could run this card and not only have a pseudo sweeper that takes advantage of the lopsided board states, but also draws them cards. And also, on turns where they just sack all their dudes to Bartolome, then they can just kill their opponent. You got like 7 dudes in the graveyard. If you've done some chip damage, you can probably finish with this card in Standard. But the other deck I'm interested in is these kind of like, rest in peace, Stick Fingers decks. Stick Fingers might rotate, but Cruel Somnophage, Souls of the Lost, these cards are still in Standard, along with a bunch of cards that will mill creatures into your graveyard. Some creatures will mill creatures into your graveyard, Aftermath Analyst, whatever. And so I think that if you're able to do some chip damage in a deck like that, this can come along and deal 12 damage or something to your opponents like really easily. If you play those like Souls of the Lost, Cruel Somnophage decks, ask yourself how many times you've had a 15 power Cruel Somnophage. Kind of a lot. So the fact that if you resolve this card, you're just 15ing your opponent, like, I actually think that's much easier than you think it is to do. So yeah, I could keep talking about this, but I've already talked about it too long for a single entry on this list. If I had my druthers and I was trying to be not as objective as possible, I would put this card at like number 9. I love this card so much. For mostly personal reasons, but in my book, and by the way, it is my book, it is my list, I'm making the video, I'm going to put it here in the top 25 because I do think that this is one of the sleeperiest cards in the set while also being a little too strong for the sleepers list. But man, we got to get to number 22. I'm sorry I talked about that one for so long. What is number 22? Here it is. It's Feathers Knight. My buddy Power Dragon just told me this is apparently a Star Trek The Next Generation reference of some kind. Specifically, it's Feathers Knight. And that is very cool. Nice lore. But if we're looking at Black 5 drops, I am somehow even more excited about this than I am Season of Loss. And I probably shouldn't be. At the end of the day, the reason Power Dragon was telling me that this is a Star Trek The Next Generation reference is because we were talking about the most overrated cards in the set. And this was one of his. I agree to an extent because I do think people are overrating this card. That said, I still think this card is bananas, dude. Really, really good. In Standard, I don't know if it's better than Aclazotz or any of the other 5 drops that we might play in place of it, but I will say, you get it out and there's plenty of tricks to effectively wrath your opponent's side of the board and only your opponent's side of the board. In the meantime, it's a 6/5 Flampler that has ward discard a card, a very real ward cost, So this is a big old dude that does real damage, ends the game in just a few bites, and is relatively difficult to get rid of. So there's a lot that I do like about this in Standard. But when we get to Commander and you look at like, oh, if I have a Elish Norn in play, all my opponent's dudes are dead. If I have a Kairvek in play, all of my opponent's dudes are dead. And there's like more ways of doing it than just that in the festivities, whatever. So this card is kind of bonkers. Also makes, in Standard, back to Standard, also makes actually killing stuff with Cut Down a little bit more easy, I think, a lot of the time. You kill Shieldred with Cut Down now. That seems okay. So yeah, this card might bring just enough relevance with it in the form of synergy to like be good in Standard. But even if it's not good in Standard, I think it's something you're going to see in the 99 of Commander decks or even as a Commander for a really, really long time. Now, let's look at another flyer. Why don't we? For number 21, it's a little bit smaller this time, but I do think it's the better card. Plume Creed Escort is my number 21. This could see some play in Commander. I guess it could, but where this card I think is better than Maha is its ability to see definite play in Standard and potential play in like Pioneer and Modern, dude. I don't know if it's good enough for Modern. I think I'm, don't be too hyperbolic. Don't go crazy, Dev. But even though this isn't Spell Queller, you get the point I'm trying to make. Like, this is a 2-mana, 2-power flyer that counters a spell, effectively. Counters a spell. Sometimes 2-mana protection spells aren't great. You want most of your protection spells to be 1 mana. But when they come with a flying body, like, yes, you do want that. In the blue-black mid-range deck, let's say I took your removal spell with a Deep Cavern Bat, and it took you 2 turns to draw another removal spell, and you play it. And I play this to protect my Deep Cavern Bat. Do you not pull all of your hair out immediately? Does that not, like if Fairy Mastermind got played at the end of your turn, and I've just been countering all of your spells for the last 3 turns, getting in with my Fairy Mastermind, and you play a removal spell on Fairy Mastermind, and I counter it with this, and now you're taking twice the amount of damage that you were taking, and you still have to draw a removal spell? Now you have to draw 2. Now you have to draw 2 removal spells. Like, are you not upset at that? I really feel like this card is so freaking irritating and will do so much. And I love it because I can't tell you how many times I've tried to play these like amazing looking 2 and 3 drop build arounds, and like they just suck. They're just not good because they die to removal on the next turn. This, I know you could say that about any protection spell in Standard, but the fact that this adds another body, more damage, and evasive ability too to the board along with countering that removal spell, yeah, dude, I could go on about this all night, but I'm just going to be basically making the same points over and over. If you don't think this card is good, you haven't played much Magic. This card is amazing. Now for number 20, I am cheating. I think it's like the first time I'm cheating on this list, but I don't think it's going to be the last one. But we'll move on to aggro 1-drops here at the 20 spot. Because I just couldn't pick one, and this would have been a top 55 if I had to give them all their own spots, Like the mouse, the new Monastery Swiftspear right here, that looks pretty ridiculous, and I know it's not as good quite as Swiftspear, but it does get +1/+1 counters, which is hellacious, man. But there's also, apart from that, even just like the 1 white mana rabbit that becomes a 3/2 when it attacks so long as you have a token, I think that's going to see a lot of play. Valley Might Caller is going to see a ton of play, dude. This is a Champion of the Parish / Champion of the Perished that works on 3-4 different creature types. And that's freaking nuts, dude. You understand how good that is, man? Paw Patch, what's his face? The new Savannah Lions with Trample, and he like evolves. What were they thinking? They made these 1-drops, dude. I think they were thinking that they were tired of people saying it's a Sunfall standard. And aggro can't exist because Sunfall, even though one of the best decks in Standard is aggro. Sometimes people don't know what they're talking about. But like people are really upset that Sunfall and all these other sweepers are so prominent in Standard right now. And I've seen so many people say that like Sunfall is going to kill Bloomburrow. Bloomburrow is going to kill Sunfall, dog. Like, what are you talking about? Look at all these ridiculous 1-drops, dude. Like, I've already seen Rabbits decks with 16 1-drops that go blazing fast, dude. So if you thought Boros Tokens was fast, you ain't seen it yet, bro. Like, the 1-drops in this set, and the 2s and 3s, but especially these premium 1-drops, I really cannot remember seeing this many good 1-drops in a single set in my life. So aggro might actually be back on the menu. If that is, it was ever off the menu in the first place. I'm not convinced it was. But number 19 is Thundertrap Trainer. This could have been Dowerport Mage. Maybe this is where Dowerport Mage, I just wanted to get that meme in one more time, but I could also be right about that. But no, Thundertrap Trainer looks insane to me, dude. This is a card I've seen very few people talk about. And I think it's because people remember Wandering Mind, or maybe they don't remember Wandering Mind, but Wandering Mind didn't see a lot of play. Good news is, this costs 50% less than Wandering Mind. It's still going to help you find the removal spell, the sweeper, the artifact or enchantment that you built your entire deck around. This helps you find it and is a 2-drop. But if you have the extra mana just laying around, let's just say you have less mana than it takes to, say, flashback a Memory Deluge. Now you effectively get to look at the top 8 of your library and pick the 2 best non-land. And that seems really good. Like you get 2 bodies on the table too. Like just this being a blocking body that might grab the Sunfall or a card draw spell or whatever it is you're looking for seems solid enough to me. Wandering Mind was kind of awkward because it was 3 mana. This being a 2-drop makes all the difference in the world. And the fact that it's got like effectively a kicker on it makes it even better in the late game. Why aren't we talking about this card, dude? It's my number 19 because it's obviously very good, but I'm like the only person on the internet that's even mentioned this card. Why is that? Notice this card. It's so good. My number 18, though, is Keen-Eyed Curator right here. Keck, I guess his name would be if he did his initials. That's actually really funny, but there's no kidding when it comes to this card, dude. This is a strictly better Watchwolf, We've gotten to the point in Magic history where, like, what Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, I think that was the set. Maybe I'm wrong, but it had the 2 green mana 3/3 with upside, and we were all like, what are we doing? And like when it comes to this card, I feel like this is even better than that card, Like it's a 2 mana 3/3 scavenging ooze, dude. Like, how good do you need a magic card to be? And then when it's been a scavenging ooze enough times, it just becomes like a 7/7. Like, this is a 2-drop that's above rate already, that gets better as the game goes on and flubs around in the graveyard, messes up what your opponent trying to do. This is man, like, how is this not just one of the generically best cards in the entire set? Do I have to justify this one at 18? If there are 17 better cards than this, I think that's kind of crazy, but again, I think there actually are. Matter of fact, let's stay in green. I think we're going to stay in green for the next couple of cards here. Number 17 is Clifftop Lookout. I think this sees a little bit more play in other formats than, say, Keen-Eyed Curator does. And by other formats, I kind of mean Commander. But, there might be other ways to do this in Commander that are just better. But not a whole lot of those ways can find your guy as Cradle for you, whereas this can. This just finds a land and always finds it. It doesn't say, look at the top 6 or any of that stupid crap. Just look at however many cards it takes to hit yourself a land, buddy. And you get that land onto the table. And a body. This card is just kind of phenomenal again, in kind of a generic way. It's not super exciting or anything, but it is a card that's almost certainly going to see some play. And in the meantime, the between time, it's probably going to replace Topiary Stomper in these kind of like Atraxa-y ramp decks, at least until the better card comes out in Duskmourn. This guy, do you know this guy's going to exist in a couple of months? He is. It's weird that we already know that, but yeah, at least for the time being, this dude's going to be that card for ramp decks, and that's probably good enough. But just the fact that it doesn't have to find basics, like even in standard, it can find one of those Surveil lands, get you an ETB trigger or something, like all that's good. But number 16, I promised you another green creature. I don't know if it's a promise you really want me to keep, but I have to. It's Scrap Shooter over here. This is another one. Like, I just feel like if there's 15 better cards in this in the set, like, this is a powerful set, and Scrap Shooter is a card that's going to see play in Standard and Commander, basically as long as you can do both of those things. This is a Reclamation Sage. That's just better. It's like a giant Reclamation Sage in Commander, and you can like gift somebody else the card. Like you can blow up Sarah's enchantment and give, Mitchell the card. And that seems very good to me. So like in Commander, it's even better, but even in Standard, man, you might be gifting your opponent a card, but you're besageing their best artifact enchantment off the table and getting a 4/4 they have to deal with. Phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. I need an interesting card to talk about because these last few cards have just been generically incredible and they deserve a spot on the list. Sure. But can we get to something that's like nuts? Yes. 15 is Beza. Here it is. Bounding Spirit. This is the card that I checked for a minute ago. Like, is this on the list? Yes, it is. It is here. I think that a 4/5 for 4 mana in white is actually something you don't see every day, but that's not what makes this card good. There's been plenty of 4 mana 4/5s that never saw play. A number of them dinosaurs, oddly enough, but still, this card is good because of that untenable, ridiculous. How did you get that onto a Magic card? That ETB trigger, dude? Like, it's going to do at least one thing when it hits the table, and sometimes it's going to do 2 or 3. If your opponent went first and hit their land drops, you're almost guaranteed the treasure. If you're playing against aggro decks of almost any stripe, you're guaranteed the next 2 modes almost as a matter of course. And if you're playing against control or even mid-range some of the time, you're guaranteed the last mode. And again, you might be able to mix and match or something. Like somehow somebody has more creatures and more cards in hand than you. Like, yeah, seems good. And you can blink it too. Like it's not like if you cast it or anything like that. So you can blink this, reanimate it, whatever, and still get the bonus. Blinking it when your opponent is not necessarily watching what they're doing seems like a pretty good idea too. So yeah, man, just everything about this card looks super duper solid. And I think it'll see play in Standard and again, possibly even Commander because of how ridiculous that Enter the Battlefield trigger is. But when it comes to Standard, I think that at the very, 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 very least, we're looking at a sideboard all-star for white decks against aggro decks. But this is more than main deck playable in a mid-range deck, and we'll probably see a lot of it. Number 14 is Fountain Port. I had to find a place for this somewhere on the list. It is slid out of the top 10. It was originally my number 10. But the more I keep thinking about it, the more I'm like, it's like I guess some Commander decks play this for sure. For sure. And I think some Commander players in the audience are probably saying like, some Commander decks play this? It's like 60% of Commander decks? That's got to be incorrect. That's got to be incorrect. It's got to be less than 50% of commander decks play this. But, if you're even approaching 30 to 40% of like potential playability, then that's an absolutely broken Magic card. But I don't think that this is broken in any way. I got to say that. I think that all of the abilities are fairly costed, but there are a lot of decks that can find use for at least one of these abilities. And if you can find use for one of these abilities, you might as well play the card, If you're in 1 to 2 colors in standard, there's another one you might as well play, like maybe Mirrex is the better card. Maybe you don't have all the slots in the world for colorless lands in your deck or something like that. Maybe that's the excuse, but I think that there are some certainly blue-white control decks that, even though they fit in Mirrex, will still fit in at least one copy of this card. So I imagine we're going to see it show up in standard and commander again because of its just generic goodness. If you're more than really less than 3 colors, then you can probably fit this into your deck unless you're just the most hardline aggro to ever exist. So again, I expect to see this popping up kind of everywhere. Low opportunity cost is definitely a real thing, but my number 13 is Sunspine Lynx. Y'all, my God. For one, I am completely terrified of this card because I want to do some really broken stuff with like life gain in the set. We got Essence Channeler in the set, a bunch of bats that care about life gain, plus Lunar Convocation. We got all of these like life gain cards in standard, and I'm kind of like, let's go, dude. Let's make this deck. And Sunspine Lynx can just cut all that off at the legs, dude. Like, it's going to be bad if anyone actually plays this card, and I think they will because the body is pretty solid for the mana cost. The mana cost isn't that outrageously high to begin with. 4 is about my upper limit, and of like good super playable creatures. But aside from that, there's more to this than just players can't gain life and damage can't be prevented. This is also going to deal a lot of like incidental damage to a lot of players over the course of a game, and maybe even be like your form of like late game reach to close a game out in your aggro deck. I mean, the dude is going to come down and lava axe everybody at a commander table. Like, close, he's going to like 3 or 4. He's going to at least bolt everybody at a commander table. That's a solid card, man. But number 12 is Vine Reap Mentor. This card should probably be in the 30s, but I just love it so much, dude. I think this is a better card than Blood Tithe Harvester. Blood Tithe Harvester had a lot of things it could do, especially when Fable of the Mirror Breaker was a card in standard. You'd see people copy their Harvester and then use it as removal because it has haste. And like, that was great. That was really good. But Harvester was still a very good card after that card got banned, and I love cards like this, man. Enters and death triggers, and both of those triggers are a pretty relevant token type, Like, you can do a lot with food right now, and you can even sacrifice it for life. I don't know if you knew that, but you can I haven't sacrificed a food for life in a while. I always try to wheel and deal and do other stuff with them, like sack them to Bartolome or whatever I'm doing. But I guess that just proves, that's kind of illustrating my point. There's so much more you can do with food than just sack it for life, but you can do that. I think in Golgari mid-range decks, this is an insta 2-drop, dude. Like, Mosswood Dread Knight is probably the better 2-drop than this. But if you're looking for other 2s, and you're playing mid-range, you need creatures, then this is incredible, dude. Like, along with Restless Cottage, there's a lot of food action in these Golgari mid-range decks. They really help you, like, last until the late game, like a mid-range deck should do. Put your plan together. And this probably trades. This probably trades in combat at the very least while still leaving like 2 things on the table. The card is unbelievable, guys. My number 11, everybody. We're almost there, guys. Number 11, the honorable mention for the top 10 is Rotten Mouth Viper because I just could not put it in the top 10. I could, not in good conscience, because I think of all the cards that all of the content creators are sort of in the preseason over judging, it might be this card. I have a good feeling that this is not as amazing as a lot of us think that it is, but at the same time, I think that this card is pretty freaking phenomenal, AJ Styles. I really do, man. I think you can get this down on turn 3 in standard extremely easily and still have non-land permanents left over after that deal. And then if it ever attacks, if it ever attacks, then suddenly your opponent's in a world of hurt, dude. They had to deal with the ETB trigger. And even if they like, I don't want to get rid of any of my stuff, I'll just lose the 4 life, whatever. Like, it goes to attack. Now if they lose 4 life, that's 8 life they've lost, and they're staring down the snacks. So, like, that could deal 14 damage over the course of 2 turns, and only 6 of that's combat damage. If they do come down on board presence or cards in their hand, you want that too. If this attacks more than once, you are winning the game, dude. And I haven't even pointed out that you played a 6/6 on turn 3 with no real downside. You know, like even Pugnacious Hammerskull has a downside. Whereas like this doesn't. And again, you see how quickly all these Boros decks, they can convoke a Knight Errant of Eos on turn 2. I'm pretty sure there's plenty of Orzhov decks that can get this thing out on turn 3 and really don't care. They just sacrificed a bunch of food or whatever it is. A couple of clues and a food, like who cares? So I'm telling you, a basically turn 3 6/6, like, yeah, man, I think that this is absolutely in the discussion. This, more than any other card in the set, looks like an interesting, powerful build around that will do work in Standard. But welcome to the top 10, everybody. We finally made it. Number 10, I am cheating, and I'm actually going to cheat a little bit in the top 10 here. I don't want to tell you that we have 10 cards left to go. We actually have like 20 because that's the way I've organized this list, but sorry about that. Number 10 is Talents. Because just like a couple of the other entries I've pointed out, you know, if I was going to give each individual one of these that I like a spot on the list, it'd be a top 100. I don't know how many of you would be too bummed out by that, but whatever. Instead, I think I'll just list my 3 to 5 favorite talents that are in this set. I do like Hunter's talent, but I like the other green talent more, I guess. Innkeeper's talent, that looks phenomenal to me, man. It just does everything that a green deck wants to do. Both of the green ones do everything a green deck wants to do, but I guess this one's better. Just put it that way. Innkeeper's talent looks pretty fine to me, but so does Builder's talent. The white one that only costs 2 mana gets you a 0/4. For just a single mana, you can level it up. And now, whenever you get like a token, whenever a non-creature, non-land permanent enters the battlefield under your control, something gets slightly more swole. That's really good when you're making a bunch of food tokens or whatever. That seems okay. But, you know, the third mode that reanimates something is really good too. It's just card does everything, you know. It's early defense, you know, it's a reanimation spell that puts a blocker on the table on turn 2. So I kind of don't know why you wouldn't want that. But aside from that, like the other rare talents look really good too, man. Like, what is it? Caretaker's talent, the white one. This one looks like it's going to see a lot of play in Commander especially, but even in Standard, you know, this does look at Takasi's Welcome or Welcoming Vampire kind of sort of impression, you know, a 3-mana white card that draws you a card every turn. Okay, I'll take that. But the second channel or the second level up on this, you know, just like pay 1 white mana to copy a token is nasty, dude. That's so good. Like, I don't even care about that last mode, even though the last mode's good too. Both the modes are good on this, and it's a reasonably costed card. But the best one of these, and I have my phone out so I can remember the name of it, is are the black ones. Like, easily, dude. Like, first of all, we'll talk about Bandit's talent in just a second. We'll talk about that. But Scavenger's talent. Scavenger's talent, my friend. For just a single black mana, you get, you know, the ability to make a food token once a turn. That's all it is when something dies. But that's pretty good for a single black mana that also puts an enchantment into play, which you can wheel and deal for various purposes. But just a couple of mana to, like, whenever you sack a permanent, somebody mills 2. That could be you too, by the way, which you might want. So, and that's not like once a turn conditional or anything. So that's pretty busted. And then this last mode only costs 3 mana. And it's also a reanimation mode that you can do every single turn during your end step, which is also nasty. I hate to use the same word twice on the same card, but like, good Lord, dude, how good did this card have to be? Like in multiple formats. Again, I think Commander plays this. I think Standard plays this, but I think there are Pioneer decks that could have a use for this card too. So just all around, Scavenger's Talent is kind of a really good looking piece of cardboard to me. I don't know about you. It looked good to me. Now, number 9, I have to cheat again. It's Villages. Again, I'm not going to give each separate one of these an entry on the list because they all would deserve one. And it's just kind of easier. It makes more sense to kind of do it this way. I'm not going to go through my favorite, like 5 of these because I think there's only 5 of them. But I will say the white and black ones are the best ones. I'm pretty sure, you know. The red one looks okay for aggro decks and all that, but the white one can grab a Deep Cavern Bat or a rabbit, like a Regal Bunnycorn or any of the rabbits from the set, and that seems really, really good. And the black one can get stuff out of your yard, I believe. Like, yeah, man, those are both phenomenal Magic cards to me. They come into play untapped and create the mana you want them to make. Like, I know you can only spend it on creatures. I also don't really care. You know, I'm going to be spending it on creatures a lot of the time. So, yeah, man, if nothing else, the black and white villages are just like absolutely abnormally good. But like all the villages are playable. If not just in Standard, also Commander. I think you like untapped lands in Commander too. My number 8 is Hugs. It is Hugs. I love Hugs, specifically right after a Little League game, right? You get home and you get one of those little hugs. They call them little hugs, right? They're little fruit drink that's in a little barrel. You know what I'm talking about? You guys know what I'm talking about. You played Little League. I don't think you had to have played Little League, but like that's the memory I have tied to them is that we get back from Little League and they have a big cooler full of little hugs. But this is not a little hug. This is a big hug right here, boy. His initials make sense too. You're going to be saying GG a lot after you resolve this dude, man. He's a 4-mana 5/5 trample. If nothing else, 4-mana 5/5 trample, but there's so much more. There's so much more. The scalability on this reminds me of like a Hydroid Krasis. And I think that there's too many creatures in the last couple of years that have been like, this is a fixed Hydroid Krasis. And I think I'm going to fall into that trap again here, honestly. But I also, again, I've said this a couple times in this video, I do not care. I don't care if I fall into that trap. I think this card is that good. I don't know what it goes into day one. I really don't. But at the same time, this is a potentially scalable 4-mana 5/5 that draws you a ton of cards if you did scale it. And even if you didn't scale it, it's still like playing an extra land for you every turn. Plays well with itself too, by the way. You know, if it draws you a couple of cards and one of them's a land, go ahead and play it. That's really good. There's still a lot of cards that see play in Commander because they're like 3-mana green. You can drop an extra land this turn. This is a single mana more than most of those cards, and will give you some redundancy with those effects in Commander. Can even be your Commander. You can put this effect in your command zone now, and I think you could already, you know, a Zeus, a Lost But Seeking, like you could already do that. Having a huge scalable dude in your command zone with that text. Also really, really sick. So I do think it sees play in that format, possibly even CEDH. Don't know if it's that good. I'm not that smart. But what I do know is that when we get back to Standard, if this can find the right home, this is an absolutely magnanimous piece of cardboard, baby. The scalability is just through the freaking roof. To the moon, kid. And even if you never scale it, you still have a giant body. So I just love everything about this card. It's another one that I'm kind of surprised more people aren't talking about. My number 7 is my favorite, like, proper name on a Magic card, maybe of all time. It's Glarb. Glarb! Calamity's Augur. Old Glarb over here. Really sounds like you're trying to clear your throat. Glarb! It's first of all, he doesn't die to cut down, doesn't die to bolt. These things I have to checklist point out, because if I don't, someone will be like, this card doesn't die to cut down and you didn't say that. But again, feel free to comment and increase engagement and all that. But yeah, unlike a card like, say, Helga, this is a 3-drop legendary creature in Standard that doesn't die to the cards people actually play. So that's important. But aside from that, this is real card advantage, man. Like, this is, you know, Courser of Krufix or something along those lines, an Augur of Autumn, I think it's called. Anything that allows you to play stuff from your library is always just going to be like, you know, having an 8th card in your hand. And sometimes it's going to be like having a 9th or 10th card in your hand if you can chain things off the top of your library. Oh, and if you're in a position right now where you can't currently chain things off the top of your library because you've already played a land or there's a 3-drop on top or whatever it is, just surveil, man. Just tap him, surveil, and, you know, maybe you put something you can play on top. It's really good, man. If you haven't drawn your 4-drop by turn 4, maybe it's on top of your library and Glarb will help you get to it, which I think is really sweet too, you know. Also has Death Touch, and like a 2/4 Death Touch is a really, really hard body to swing into. So I really like this. I don't know if there's a Soul Tide deck day 1 either. I don't. But I will say, you know, I feel like I have to evaluate every card for Commander too. And like, just like the last card, there may be other ways to get this effect in your command zone, but not that many, and not that many that allow you to play this particular spread of colors. Also, last thing I'll say about this card, best steez in the entire set, and potential best steez in all of Magic, at least in the last few sets, dude. Like, the guy's so laid back. He's got the perfect attire. He's got his big old, like, lily pad throne. He's just kind of like, oh, what are you guys doing here? Oh, I expected you. Like, he kind of weirdly reminds me of, like, Akio from Utena. If you get that reference, you're an amazing person. But just like, you know, that kind of like carelessly dripping sexuality. Just, oh, I'm a frog and I am sexy. You know, like, what an amazing character this guy is. But let's move on. We really should at this point. To Salvation Swan here at number 6. This was my number 4 at one point. but it is still in my top 10. So I really do think this is one of the best cards in the set. Even if you haven't played against Restoration Angel, you should be able to look at this and just know that it's going to wreck your day. It may cost slightly too much mana for some people, whatever. I still think that it's got a real future ahead of it. If not any other format, then definitely in Standard. Flash is always going to be really strong, especially on a flyer, so you can use it as a removal spell at its floor, but at its ceiling, you can win the game. And I'm telling you, even if you don't win the game outright, literally, then, you know, blinking that dude that just blocked up and has a crazy ETB trigger, it will functionally win you the game a lot of the time. Number 5, I think, is the last time I'm going to cheat. Yes, it is. Number 5 is just discard stuff. It's just the discard stuff that's in this set, you know. We got to see Bandit's talent, so back to that card, which I do think is the, like, technically most important discard card in the set to actually make a discard deck a reality, because it has a rack effect on it, for God's sake. This card has a rack effect on it, but it also gives the discard player the ability to outdraw their opponent, which is really, really important. And it's not like a Megrim or a rack or something that you have to skip your Thoughtseize turn to play or whatever. No, it's a rack that also makes them discard a card. Do you understand how good this card is? I don't know that you do, but there's also, like, not Thought Not Seer, like Thought Scour Rat, whatever it's called. This guy on your screen right now, he's a 3-mana 2/2. They have to discard a thing when it comes into play or whatever. That guy is ridiculous. Like, even if they just discard a card, even if you didn't make them lose life, and they just choose the card to discard, you're still getting a body that makes them discard, which is good. But if you did make them lose life, say because maybe on the last turn you played a Deep Cavern Bat on curve, got in with your Deep Cavern Bat, should be easy to do, play this dude, you choose the card, the exile, they're never going to play Sunfall that game. They're going to cry. It's going to be really bad. But there's also, like, Cruel Claws, something, this card right here, this thing on your screen. So this is a 2-mana Thoughtseize, effectively, that if you gift a card to them, will then let you play the card you snatch with it. You understand how powerful it is? Oh, and by the way, I didn't catch this first time I read the card. People in my comments section told me. Sometimes you guys are very useful. Thank you very much for this. Obviously, the reminder text, that was a fun one, says that the gift happens before all the other effects of the card. So they draw the card, and then you look at their hand. So if they drew something really, really good, you get to take it. That's pretty amazing. So, I don't know. I like a lot about all of the discard stuff in this set. And it does look like with a couple of other discardy things that we have available in Standard, we can actually make an honest-to-God discard deck now. And I'm really, really jacked about that, man. So, yes, Aclazotz at the top end is kind of our finisher. And yeah, dude, that deck's going to be sick. But number 4 is Dawn's Truce. Another one that I feel like people are underestimating. It's only like $3 to pre-order this card, and that's at pre-order prices. This is only like $3 to order. This is a Heroic Intervention, but like not necessarily better, but it has like more spread of use than a Heroic Intervention, and it's in a different color. I will say, when it comes to Commander, like there's Teferi's Protection in white, and that will still always be the most played effect like this ever. But that said, this is still kind of pretty close to a Heroic Intervention or a Teferi's Protection or something like that. Just, and those cards are very expensive. You know, Heroic Intervention is still like $8 to $10 to pick up. Teferi's Protection, I don't even know, it is at least a $20 card, if not more. Am I right about that? I'll check. But either way, these are some of the most like well-known Commander cards of all time. So I don't see how this doesn't end up being the very same. Aside from that, you know, it gives you the hexproof too. So there's like protection from fireballs and stuff like that. That's unbelievable. That's so good. Like a lot of the time, if they try to hit you with a discard spell or something, you can Dawn's Truce and like say no. That's good. And there will be discard spells in Standard at least. And it's a good, like, you know, sideboard card, but even outside of the sideboard, this could see plenty of play in these like Boglesy decks, if you don't know what I'm talking about, like decks that want to target their creatures with pump spells or whatever. Those decks often have a lot of spells that are functionally counter spells against removal. And this does that too, while also protecting you against like certain sweepers in the format, non-Sunfall sweepers. So I just think this card kind of does everything that you would want a Magic card to do. And I just think it's wild that it's not pre-ordering at $10. I really do. So pick this up while you can. I think it's a steal at the current price that it's at. And that's my only financial advice I'm going to give you in this entire video, but follow it because Dawn's Truce is a ridiculous Magic card. But we're in the top 3, guys. And I actually have to put one of probably the most overrated cards in the set in the top 3, because it can be as overrated as you want it to be. It's still 3 Tree City, man. It's still 3 Tree City. It's still going to see tons and tons and tons of play of commander play until the end of time, until our grandchildren's grandchildren are done playing Magic, which hopefully will never happen. This card will be seeing play, dude. Like, I know it doesn't go in everything. I'm completely aware of that, but just like elves and commander, like obviously plays this card, and like just about any kindred deck that cares about the creature types is all day going to be on this thing. And that is a ton of commander decks. It really is. But even in standard, I think that certain things like rabbits or decks that like really overload on tokens and stuff like that can probably play this card to at least some effect. But mostly this is a commander card, but it is a commander all-star. It doesn't go in everything. Say it again, doesn't go in everything. But the decks it does go in, it's effectively going to be the next best thing to Gaia's Cradle. And that's good. Understatement of the year. Gaia's Cradle is a good Magic card. And even when you have to go through extra steps and pay mana and stuff to activate your Gaia's Cradle, it's still going to be a good Magic card. This card it's a little unbelievable they printed this. I'll be honest, but it's probably only truly good in like casual commander. And I'm pretty sure the ceiling on cards is way higher in casual commander. So I guess it makes some sense that it did see the light of day, but still, as overrated as it might be in some circles, this is still like the commander card of the set. But let's move on to my number 2 here, guys, where I am going to take a pretty big swing with a card, especially considering when we'll get to my number 1, you can probably already guess what that is right now. I've made no bones, no secret about what my favorite card in the set is. By leaps and bounds, I know what my favorite card is. And it's a lot of your favorite card too. And if you haven't, you may notice there is one card that is conspicuous in its absence on this list so far. We'll get to it in a second, but number 2 is going to be a lot harder to call than number 1 this time around, because my number 2 is Mockingbird. This is maybe the 3rd card on this list that I wanted on my sleepers list. And then I thought, no, the card is just too good. It's too rawly, ridiculously powerful to be on the sleepers list. Like, I don't see how more people aren't seeing how crazy this card is. But for the last time, in case you have read this card a bunch and you've never noticed before, or if this is the first time reading the card and you didn't notice, because it's easy to miss this, you don't copy a creature with mana value equal to X. You copy a creature equal to mana value, the mana you spent to cast Mockingbird. So it's counting that blue mana. You can copy a 3-drop for 3 mana. You can copy a 2-drop for 2 mana. You can copy a 1-drop for 1 mana, which is really good in like a Venerated Rot Priest deck or something like that. Or any deck that plays like a 1-drop you're trying to cash in on, right? But just the fact that like for any 2-drop in the game, this is a better Phantasmal Image that flies. For any 3-drop in the game, this is a strictly better clone, more or less. Again, that flies, again, there are 5, 6, 7-drop creatures that you might want to copy that like theoretically clone would be better because it costs less or whatever. But the vast majority of creatures played in standard or Magic the Gathering, whether it's commander or whatever, are like 2, 3, 4 mana creatures. And the fact that I can now copy your Sheldred and it flies, come on, dude. Like for 4 mana, for the same mana you spent for your Sheldred, I can copy your Sheldred. I can copy your Preacher of the Schism, but my Preacher of the Schism freaking flies. It's always getting in, baby. And like, I can copy your guys. I can copy my guys. Like, I don't understand how people are not freaking out on a daily basis that this card is about to exist, both for standard and commander. I think this is a freaking beater. It's going to be everywhere. And maybe I'm just like completely wrong and I'm way off base here, but I just don't see a negative aspect to this card. Huh. I remember back there when I was like, Teferi's Protection is at least $20. It's actually like $40, like a $40 card. That's ridiculous. Hey, how come this Secret Lair drop one is the cheapest one? That's really nice. That's a really cool looking card. Why is that the cheapest one? You can get this one for $30 and like, it's awesome. It's like the best art I've ever seen on a Teferi's Protection. Anyway. And it's a Secret Lair. You'd think it would be more expensive, but no, anyway. What's number 1? Nobody cares. Nobody cares about the Teferi's Protection. Number 1, as you may have guessed, is Iridescent Vine Lasher. Now, I have been in love. I'm trying to make sure that I'm like using that term with all of the weight behind it that goes with it, right? But I think I am. I have been, honest to God. Now, I have been in love with this card. I'm really trying to make sure that I'm using that phrase properly with all the weight that's supposed to be behind it. And I honestly think I am. I have been legit in love with this card since the first moment I laid eyes on it. Me and Ellis Core have kind of an understanding about this card. We have an open relationship anyway, and honestly, I think she's getting all of the benefit from that. But I gotta say, I haven't loved a card this much upon first reading it since Ellis Core, and that's kind of a big deal if you know me at all. And once you start introducing the combos, like once you start putting a bunch of lands into play all at one time, then the card just kills your opponent, especially if you do have a couple of different copies of it out. So like Aftermath Analyst and Lumra, those cards, this is effectively a win condition for those decks. So, if you get your Splendid Reclamation effect and you put like 8 lands on the table, you got 2 of these guys, you're probably going to kill them by doing that. So win condition, but also really good like incremental damage pips for, various mono black decks or aggro decks, or the green black lands deck, which is a whole different beast in and of itself. So that's good. Just altogether a fantastic Magic card. Like whether you're ramping, whether you're doing some kind of trick, or whether it's just damage, it's just incremental damage. Your 1-drop doesn't often guarantee that you get in for, 5-6 damage if they never remove it. And this kind of does more so than other 1-drops. Also targets an opponent if you want to commit crimes. Right? Targets an opponent, so that's pretty good. There's a lot of stuff this does. There's so much stuff this does, even though it looks like an incredibly simple Magic card. 1 mana, landfall, 1 damage. Again, incredibly simple, but a card that should have existed years ago, and maybe there's a reason it didn't, because it's outrageously powerful. But that is all, dear friends. We have made it through all 50 cards on this list, and like I said, there's plenty I wanted to put on the list that I couldn't find room for. Flame Cash Lizard is one of the best cards in the set. Flame Cash Lizard is so good. It should have been on this list somewhere. I still feel really bad about myself, and there's more cards than that too. But again, if you didn't see something you really like here, go check out the Sleepers list. We only did 10 of those. You don't have to go through a whole other hour-long video, but maybe you have a long commute back from work, or you have a long lunch break or something. I know why and when you watch these videos. See your comments. So, you can't necessarily watch this one while you're cooking, but you can watch that one while you're cooking. That's only like 23 minutes long, so give it a shot. But anyway, that's all I've got for this one, guys. Just let me know what all your favorite cards in Bloomburrow are, how you felt about my picks, what your picks are that didn't make my list. There are a lot of things to comment on down there, despite how many times I was like, don't comment that. There's still so much to say, right? So get down there and let me know how you felt about all the stuff. And that's about it, man. Like I said, I was going to do this again towards the end of the video. Do it. It actually helps. It's like, it takes no time to do it. And it helps immensely just to like the video. Just hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, which also takes super minimal effort. You don't have to pay me a dime. Just subscribe to the channel and I'll be a happy camper. We're trying to make 200,000 subs right now, and we're only about 74,000 subs away. So we got 76. So we'll get there soon with your help. Every little bit counts. Aside from that, throw $1 a month in the Patreon pot. It's just $1, man. You got $1. You ain't got $1. You know what I'm saying? It's my favorite line in The Wood. As a matter of fact, just because I referenced The Wood in a YouTube video in 2024, I deserve $1 for that. You like The Wood is a great movie. Go watch The Wood. Either way, it's only $1 a month to check out the Patreon, and you'll be able to vote on what decks we do once Bloomburrow actually comes around. First Patreon poll of the season in like a day or two now. So go ahead and hit the link in the description. Check out the Patreon. Throw $1 a month my way. It'll support me in ways you cannot possibly imagine, and I need it right about now for a lot of reasons, but I'm not going to get into it. Either way, that's about all I've got for this one. I love you all very much just for being here. Thanks for the watch time, and honestly, thanks for the love and support. Like I said, 9 years on YouTube. That's pretty amazing, guys. So here's to Duskmorn and Foundations and every set after those. We're going to be here forever, baby. SBMTG, 100 episodes, whatever you want to say. We'll be here forever, and that's mostly because of you guys. Thanks for that. But for now, I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.